just while Adam is joining us, I'll introduce the panel as Adam takes his seat. So we have Adam Kinsley, who is actually Director of Public Policy at Sky. So we're not breaking news on a reorganisation at Sky, I'm pleased to say. Vittorio Bertola, who's Head of Policy and Innovation at Open-Xchange. Mallory Knodel, who's Head of Digital at Article 19. And last but not least, Mike Blanche, who's Head of Telecoms Strategic Relationships at Google. So we've deliberately got people from different bits of the debate, if I put it that way, in a positive sense, this afternoon. In terms of structure, just to set your expectations, each of the panelists will give sort of 2-3 minutes worth of opening thoughts around the topic. I'll then have a fairly easy first question just to get the debate going, and then we're going to come out to the audience. So I probably don't need to say, please make sure you've got some questions, because it sounds like there are plenty, which is marvellous. What I will do, though, is to try and, as far as possible, ensure that you use the roving radio mic to ask your question, and also I'll push you to make sure you said who you are and where you're from, because that actually helps inform how best to answer the question, because you probably have a different perspective depending on the organisation that you're from. So that would just keep things nice and straightforward. So to set the panellists' expectations, we'll probably start with Mallory and come this way with your opening comments, which is a fairly random way of doing it, but that's fine. As I say, a couple of minutes of opening comments from each person. I've got one question for them, so after that I'll be looking to all of you to ask some interesting, challenging, hopefully not too hostile questions, and we'll see where the debate takes us. So Mallory, over to you.
Hi everyone. I don't know that my mic is working. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's not, right? It's working. Great. So I'm Mallory Knodel. I work for Article 19. Article 19 is based in London, but we're an international human rights organization that focuses on freedom of expression. That's where it gets its name from, because freedom of expression is the 19th article of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And yeah, I've worked in this space since 2007. I was a systems administrator for a small independent ISP in Brooklyn, and also worked for the Association for Progressive Communications, which is a network of small ISPs like that that are based around the world, but primarily in the global south. So yeah, that's me. I am the head of digital for Article 19, which means I run a team of women mostly, although there is one man now recently, who participate in standard setting. So we look at IETF, ITU, all of those acronyms, and look for any opportunity to help influence the value system and the design choices that may enable human rights. So that's, I think, all you want from me at this stage, right?
That's fantastic. Okay. Thank you, Mallory. Adam.
Thank you. I was just going to offer a few observations on some of the policy perspectives here. Originally, when we planned this session, Andrew, we were hoping that we would have government here, but due to the election and PERDA rules, they're here, but they can't talk. But I just want to say that they have taken a real interest in this space, and that there's obviously good reason for that, because DNS resolution has been done locally by ISPs. There's a reliance has been built up on the practices, and then laws have been introduced in this country, certainly, that have embedded DNS filtering. So interesting to go back to the last couple of presentations when we get to Q&A on that. So I mean, I think we can expect that certainly in this country, the UK government is going to be keen to watch how implementation goes, and if some of the current policy outcomes can't be achieved, I think that we can expect them to act. And just one example of where we've seen things like this happen, in the UK in 2017 we had the Digital Economy Act, which required pornography websites to be age verified. That was how the law got introduced into Parliament. Politicians, opposition politicians didn't like that because there was no enforcement mechanism, so they insisted that ISPs filtered any sites which were non-compliant. Even though that hasn't come in to be implemented, we know that the government, in its broader online harms white paper they've talked about, again, are looking for ISP filtering, probably using DNS of any non-compliant sites. And if that breaks, I think you'd expect a reaction. As Paul said earlier, any unilateralism begets further unilateralism, so there's consequences here. So where does that leave us? I just want to mention 3 principles that I think that we need to think about. There's obviously been lots of technical discussion. We did 3 hours of it this morning. But from a policy perspective, 3 things I think we could condense it to. So one is consumer choice. I think that we absolutely need to respect consumer choice. The obvious example that we have is parental controls, where our customers elect to use our parental controls. And that needs to be respected. And if some of the things I've heard here today, it feels like that might not be respected, whereby children can download browsers to get around that, or whether some of the other solutions don't respect those choices in the home network. I think there needs to be respect for local regulation. As mentioned, if some of these implementations seek to undermine existing practices, there's likely to be responses. We know that UK politicians in the UK certainly have had some pretty robust discussions with the browser companies. So I think it's right that we try and get this right from the start, rather than go back and fix it later and end up with layers more regulation. And then user protection. This is something that we talked about a lot this morning. Local ISPs do a lot to protect their users. The rest of the internet expects that. And I think that generally, if we see that those controls aren't factored in, and Hugh was asking questions just before, then that's going to expose a lot of businesses. And I think that we can't expect people, civil society, large companies, small companies, to have to engage in IETF. I think there's got to be a policy response that ensures that cyber threats are built into this implementation. So just some opening comments from me there. Hopefully that's useful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. Vittorio.
Well, as a major DNS vendor, of course, we were among the very first ones to notice what was happening and raise the problems. So I want to start on a positive note and say that in the last year and a half, I've seen progress. So I think we're making positive progress on this. Though I must also say that the policy discussion is just started, and there are still many policy stakeholders, non-technical stakeholders, that have just started to understand the issue and, forming an idea. So I think we will still see more discussion coming, and in a way it was, I think, a failure of the IETF not to involve the non-technical stakeholders earlier, so that we could get to a deployment plan which was more broadly agreed, rather than having to catch up with the problems. On the other hand, I think that this, what was originally a very technical question is now morphing into very far-reaching architectural issues. So the next phase possibly will be to have this kind of broad architectural discussions, starting from the DNS level, where of course the architectural issue is whether we should stay with the traditional architecture in which people have basically one resolver and they get it from the network by default, and then they change it if they want, to an architecture in which it's the application set in the default, or maybe there is no resolver anymore and just resolverless DNS, basically having the client talk directly with authoritatives in the end. But then if you go to an internet level, in terms of internet architecture, what's happening, it's partly what Paul Vixie was saying, but I also see it from another viewpoint. Up to now, we had a stack of layers, but the layers were based on trust, in the sense that the top layers would actually trust what the lower layers were doing and the information they were providing them. While the approach now, not just for DoH, but for other protocols in general, with all the encrypt everything approach, approach seems to be that the applications don't want to trust the lower layers anymore. And so this is really changing the architecture of trust over the internet and creating some unilateral reactions. And so this is, in my opinion, a dangerous trend, and we should really think at where we are going with this. And then there's even a high architectural level, which is a completely non-technical architectural level, is the one of control and basically rule setting over the internet. And we're seeing this tension not just in DNS. I mean, DNS is just a very small part, but if you look at the political discussions on the web tax, I mean, a lot of other things that are apparently not related, they are all boiling down to this concept of digital sovereignty. With, I mean, the technical community, mostly the big technical, global technical internet platforms, and also parts of civil society arguing that the internet is a borderless space and there's almost no place anymore for governments to set rules. And on the other hand, governments now, even, I mean, traditionally it was governments like China, like Russia, maybe India, Brazil, but in the last few years it's been governments like the US, the UK, Australia, and now also Germany for different aspects, on different points, claiming that there's a role for policy setting, for sovereignty, for law enforcement, and this needs to be taken into account in the architecture of basically of the internet. And so where this discussion will go, I don't know, but I think this is the political discussion that we're going to see more and more in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Vittorio, and last but not least, Mike.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Mike Blanche. I'm from Google. I've worked in the internet infrastructure industry for 25 years now, which is quite a long time. And I was the CTO of a UK ISP for five years of that. So I understand things from kind of the other side of the fence a little bit as well. My role at Google kind of sits somewhere between business, technical, and policy. So I know a little bit about a lot, but a lot about nothing. So you have to forgive me for some of that. But the first point I'd like to make, in the opening here, is just to clear up any misunderstandings there might be about what Google is doing and what Google is planning. And there's two different parts to DoH, and sometimes today the two different parts are being conflated. First is upgrading the user's connection to their existing DNS server to be encrypted. And the second is changing the user's DNS server to be something other than what it was before and potentially a more centralized service. And to be clear, Google is only doing the first one of those. Chrome is implementing same provider DNS upgrade that's rolling out in Chrome 79, which is in beta now, I think, and for a 1% experiment for a very small set of users on providers that we know are working, and it's a very small experiment to see what happens, make sure it works. We don't want to break anything. We have no intention of breaking enterprise controls, breaking family filtering. That will all continue to work as it was before if you're pointing at the same DNS server as before. So I just want to clear up that misunderstanding. There may be concerns about centralization of the internet in other contexts, but for Google, we're not planning to change everyone automatically to use Google's DNS server. Google doesn't want to be the world's ISP, and we don't want to be the world's DNS provider either.
Yes, good to clear that up from the outset. Now, I think it's been fairly obvious from the discussions so far that almost pretty much, I think, every aspect of what has come up, there's both a good and bad side to it. Or as was said this morning, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, which I think is an equally good analogy for this. So we'll start with that. So I'd like to get each of you just your reflections on your perspective, whether DoH overall, taking everything into account, is a force for good. And we'll perhaps go the other way this time, so Mallory can have the last word this time round. And then we'll be coming to the audience for your questions, so make sure you have some. So from what you've seen and heard both today and obviously over the last months and years, what's your take, Mike, in terms of, on balance, do you think DoH is a force for good, or have you got concerns around it?
Well, for us, absolutely it is, otherwise we wouldn't be implementing it. DNS is one of the few last parts of the chain in in how a user establishes a connection that is not encrypted and is not secure and is vulnerable to interception and attack. So clearly we do think it's a good thing, and I see parallels between encrypted DNS and the push towards moving from HTTP to HTTPS earlier in this decade, where there was a big industry-wide encouragement of securing the connections to the websites, but we still have this unencrypted, insecure method of determining which website you're going to get pointed to.
Yeah.
So it's clearly a good thing. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't implementation challenges and in terms of how we do it in a way that doesn't break important things, that brings everyone along with us, and solves the problem, especially of discovery. Like how are you sure that you trust the server that you're connecting to, and so on. So definitely challenges. But we think it's it doesn't solve all the problems either, because there's still other bits of the DNS chain that need fixing. But it's a step in the right direction, definitely.
Okay, so sort of key piece of the jigsaw overall. Yeah. Thank you. Vittorio, have you got a different perspective on it overall?
I mean, in general, technologies are never good or bad. It's how you use them that makes them good or bad. I mean, specifically, I think encrypting the DNS connection and providing some security and privacy is a good thing. So the problem is not with the encryption in itself, it's with all that's coming with it. So the change of models and of architectures, as we were saying. I do have some issues with the way the DoH protocol was released. I think there are some flaws, but not at the technical levels, but in the requirements that maybe sometimes not even explicit that it's trying to fulfill. But in some cases, they are even explicit. I mean, there were some declarations about disempowering certain types of intervention, even if it's good. And sometimes I'm still amazed when I go to the, say, technical community meetings, ITF, by how simplistic is that approach. I mean, even here, before we were discussing about it becoming more costly and difficult for state actors to execute warrants and have access to information. And the tone seemed like it's always a bad thing for governments to have access to information. Well, there are some good reasons why actually governments, law enforcement agencies try to have access to information to protect people, to defend against crimes. I mean, in democratic countries, I think if you have all the due process and the due protections, it's actually a good thing. So I think we should work more, even as a technical community, to find ways to tell one situation from the other, which is absolutely not easy, but I think it's the only way forward, in policy terms especially.
Okay, thank you. Adam, I know you touched on some of perhaps the trade-offs around things like parental control. So overall, where do you think things are at the moment?
I mean, look, I wouldn't actually want to offer a technical view over DNS over HTTPS over other encrypted DNSs. And like others have said, the standard is a technical standard. The challenges that I've seen are just the process whereby you have a technical standard made in isolation of broader policy considerations. And we ran through this morning a whole load of different use cases which are going to need to be solved. And if you fail to solve those use cases, I think we're going to end up in a worse place. So I don't really have a view of whether it's a good standard or not, but it's certainly highlighting a whole load of policy questions, and that actually raises a bigger question to me, which is how internet standards are set in isolation of what policymakers and other people and civil society actually may really care about, and that's a broader question, I think.
Yes. So there's an excellent segue then to Mallory, because I think it's notable that certainly if you go to ITF, civil society is not well represented in any of the discussions. But nevertheless, because I think you have a different perspective to the others, so on balance, do you think DoH is a force for good, or you've got some reservations? Where do you think it is currently?
I do think it's a force for good, and I do have reservations. But first of all, the good. So it's very good for human rights. It's good for privacy and confidentiality. It's good for censorship circumvention and freedom of expression. It's good for user-centric security. So what is happening, and I can recuse myself from being part of industry, so I don't need to worry about the trade-off between whose data, where the data is now. Is it with this industry, or is it now with this industry? It doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, you are just shifting the trust in data by encrypting this, by encrypting the DNS. And I think that's kind of on purpose. I think that means that maybe there is more trust in browsers that go out of their way to talk to users about privacy versus ISPs. A lot of users couldn't even tell you what ISPs or what resolvers they're using right now. So this is an improvement in terms of user control. And that is the key here. So if you give users control, if you give them a choice between use the existing ISP now or use something that is actively trying to convince you that it's more trustworthy and will protect your privacy, they're going to choose the more privacy respecting one, right? And I think that what is happening, what's the magic of why it's being rolled out in browsers by default is that users now have that choice. Before, it's existed for years, right? You could have used these before. If you're a power user of your computer, you've controlled this, right? But the point is that now the average user is getting this choice. So, but I will get to the caveat. So the things that do concern me about it are centralization and data protection. So I think on the first point with centralization, although to be completely fair, I take a very wide view of centralization in the tech space, and we have much bigger problems than DoH, right? We have centralization of browsers. One, we have centralization of device providers. There's a huge amount there, right? Mm-hmm. But you also get you resolve that problem with Chrome. So thanks, Chrome. You're working on making this not a question of centralization. And then on data protection, I'd like to thank Mozilla because I think Firefox really is raising the bar with its trusted resolvers for privacy respecting provision of these services. I also do, just something that came up earlier in the day, I also do care a lot about illicit or illegal targeted attacks, but I think that those sorts of things require a variety of tactics to protect vulnerable populations, and it's usually done within a framework of harm reduction and mitigations that are not only out of scope for this meeting, but out of scope for ISPs to participate in. So just to put that on the table. And I think I think before I was maybe exaggerating when I said I don't care about business models. I do a bit, and our organization and my team in particular does look at the human rights practices of businesses, and it is important, I think, to follow the best practice for human rights that's laid out in the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. So we do a bit of that, but I think as well that's a bit more targeted, working with aligned ISPs or other sorts of internet infrastructure providers to look at their practices and whether or not they've got a high enough bar for user privacy and those sorts of things.
Fantastic. Right, well, I'm hoping that there are plenty of questions. On the assumption that there are, Till has got the roving mic. So if people could raise your hands, with maybe take 2 or 3 questions, probably 3 to start with, and then see where the conversation takes us from there. So who would like to go first? I think Fred has got his hand up, so maybe start with Fred and Manman over there, and so pass it to the this side. Inevitably, it's always furthest piece away from the mic.
It's not Fred, though. Yeah.
So Fred first, then behind him. So we take those 2, and then we'll take some further questions after that. So Fred.
You can call me Fred from now on, not Neil, which is...
Oh, sorry, Neil. I do apologise, Neil.
So I just want to pick up something Mallory said. So you talk about Mozilla raising the bar and how ISPs maybe don't have necessarily good privacy policies and things. Well, I live in Europe, at least for now, certainly part of the EU, which has the GDPR, which I would argue actually has set the bar for privacy regulations. And it hasn't set the bar just in terms of what Mozilla has a contract with Cloudflare, what Cloudflare say they're going to do, whatever their CEO says he's going to do today or tomorrow, whatever, that's actually set down in law, in a legal framework across 27 countries. And so certainly as far as I'm concerned, I have much more faith in that as a regulation than something that the company in the US decides that they want to say or not say. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering what you think about that.
Okay, before anyone answers that, can you pass it directly behind you?
Hi there, Mamnan Khan, BT. So I've got two quick questions. First one to Mallory. Mallory, you mentioned about how you would give the choice to users. But the reality is that most people, ordinary people, they don't know anything about the architecture of the internet, where the data is going, who is the privacy champion, all that kind of stuff, right? So the reality is a bit different to kind of the rhetoric here. That's one point. And the second point, one to Mike. We know there's different teams within Google, right? There's, you got your Chrome, and Chrome takes more of a leading role in this, but actually we know there's stuff going on within the Android space. And so is there like a joined up sort of view in there in terms of your policy on DoH? It'd be good to, if you can clarify that. Thanks.
Okay, so if I just broaden two of those three questions, I think one of them I probably can't, because I think it's very clearly for Mike on the sort of the Google family. But whilst you're thinking about the answer to that, perhaps a wider question that any of the rest of the panel, including Mallory, might wish to answer is the whole thing about is it better to have the sort of privacy sort of policy set down in legislation as opposed to individual company privacy policies? And then to broaden Marilyn's question slightly, can you get informed consent on something like DNS that your typical user probably has never heard of before today? Since you were called out both those, Mary, I'll ask you first, and then if anybody else wants to comment on those as well, do come in.
Absolutely. I mean, I applaud and envy how much redundancy you have in Europe for protecting users. That is certainly not the case for the rest of the world, but I don't think that's a problem. I think we should have a layered approach, and it may be that some of these conflict, but I don't think that Europeans are losing out. And I mean, you just have conflicting models of which privacy option is better. And then I'm not really sure I understood what you're saying. I mean, you certainly weren't saying like users don't understand the internet, so that's fine. I think but to maybe clarify my point there was that users do have choice, but also they don't have to know. So the nice thing about DoH by default is if you've got a browser and it's one of the major three browser, any of the browser, let's just be honest, it's going to provide the service and you don't have to know. But it makes it more obvious. Like now you have to go into some setting and click a bunch of times, and you have to know what the DNS is, know what a good resolver is. So that's sort of the point that I was making there. I think that was all I was going to respond
to. Probably covered it, yeah. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in your comments as well about choice, because it was interesting that Eric talked about wordsmithing that language quite heavily, and yet where Mozilla have come down is having this box that doesn't go away until you've clicked on something, highlighting the box that says, yeah, I get it now, and it's the opposite nudge theory in which in the UK ISPs were encouraged to do with parental controls, which is sort of an open choice, but actually nudging people for the safety version of that. So there's certainly some thought has gone into turning it on and putting your DoH services on. So I just don't see that's a biased decision, and it's not an open choice as you've just suggested. So that's just an observation, and then that gets you into GDPR, which was my question earlier, because we do have laws across Europe about consent, and I'm not a lawyer either, but I suspect that that's going to be a challenge for you guys to deploy that across Europe without the risk of fines, I think, of up to 4% of turnover. So it's make sure you do get your lawyers onto it.
Yeah, I do remember what I was going to say, which is that I think if someone is going to go out of their way to download Firefox, it might be because they're concerned about their privacy already, because Firefox has done an amazing job for years of telling people that we respect your privacy, and that is their business model. They're trying to get people to use their stuff because they respect it, and you see that this is consistent with that. And I think Chrome is also meant that because there are so few browsers, they're sort of raising the bar for each other, and so it's really great from a user perspective that there's that battle over we're the more privacy respecting application. That's brilliant. Yeah. And I think that's maybe contrary to what the ISPs in the UK anyway, all this is not, I had to actually learn about this industry very recently, that you're maybe marketing the filtering capabilities. So you're also, it's not only just that parents or others want your filtering ability, you're actively marketing it to them. So even parents who might not have thought of it before because they maybe don't know how the internet works or so on, they're compelled to do it because it's been framed and marketed as a product to be a good parent. You should filter your stuff, right? I mean, I'm not saying that they don't have choice. They're opting in or out. I don't know. Like I said, I just learned about this recently, how it works here.
So first of all, I don't accept that point. I'm not sure that's right at all. And there's also a whole load of other things that ISPs will be doing on behalf of their customers. But
sure, yes.
Just moving this a little bit away from just Mozilla's approach, because we will be seeing DoH applications appearing everywhere, DoH resolution appearing everywhere, and it could be that they're just in applications that are downloaded where people have no idea, and it's not that they're downloading Mozilla or Firefox because they think they like it. They're downloading any sort of app, and suddenly there's a whole load of consequences which are going to flow, and they will have no choice and no idea, and be very surprised by the reactions and what happens there. So I think that's something we need to...
That's fair. We have concentrated, I guess, the discussion today primarily on browsers, and you're absolutely right. There's a whole different class of apps where it might not be anything like as transparent as arguably some of the best practices that we've discussed today so far. Vittorio, I know there's been some debate, I think Bert, for example, in your own organisation, made a few points about good or bad language choices on the user dialogue. I mean, going back to these two questions, do you have a point of view on either in terms of either the GDPR point versus sort of company sort of privacy policies, or indeed the whole sort of informed consent?
No, I think this is a key point, and I see, there are many in the technical community that argue that users are not able to give informed consent, no matter how you frame it. I think that's not true, and in the end it's not a choice, since we have in Europe a law that says that you have to ask for informed consent. So I don't think that Mozilla's pop-up as it is meets the requirements of the European law, but I think they are aware of it. So if they ever wanted to deploy in Europe, they will just consult the lawyers and possibly also the ICO and find ways of doing it which are compliant with the GDPR. So, and in the end, by the way, I am a Firefox user. I've been for the last, since it exists basically. So I actually value my privacy, and so I still think they are sincere in this attempt. Though I think they underestimated the potential privacy issues deriving from sending your data securely to a limited number of big DNS resolver operators. So that's the other side of the privacy discussion, which was not maybe immediate, but now it's coming up. In general, I think that the point about who gets to set the rules is valid, and is one of the key issues, as I was saying, not just for this issue, but in general. So we are in the middle of a trend in which, for example, in the whole fake news, hate speech debate, the private platforms become the rule makers for what gets published or taken down. And this, in my opinion, this is not acceptable. So you should have public ways of setting rules through democratic processes, because I can vote for my government, but I cannot vote for the CEO of any of these companies.
Yes, there's a thought. Thank you. Mike, I think before we get on to the broader portfolio within Google question, I think Google's policy was framed quite interestingly, which was the policy of no surprises for users, which I think was an interesting approach to this. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
So we would definitely support user kind of choice and control, but equally we do understand that for many users, asking them to choose a DNS provider would confuse some people that they're not, and so we would need to be very careful about if we ever went down that path. We don't want to make people to make decisions that they don't necessarily understand the unintended consequences of, breaking family filtering or other things. and we don't want to break the enterprise networks and the education network controls as well. So yeah, definitely support the principle, but also we have to look at the wide base of users out there and make sure that it's done in a careful and considered way.
Yes, indeed. And then on the sort of wider Google family, what can you say on that?
So actually, Chrome wasn't the first product to implement encrypted DNS. It was Android P, which came out in August 2018, had DoT in it, and auto upgrades, again, to the same DNS server in an opportunistic way if it's available. And that was released with virtually no kind of commentary or nobody noticed, basically. So
possibly this room.
Someone noticed. Yeah. Someone noticed.
This is maybe not the room to say that, but in the round.
The Chrome, obviously, it has been noticed, and so I think going forward, it's very hard to kind of get a single Google position on anything, because that's not the kind of company we are. We're not top down. We're very kind of bottom up. And if you want to know what the Google organization chart looks like, Google funny org chart. And there's an image that was actually drawn by a Googler, which has this kind of crazy mess of lines that all kind of interconnect to each other, rather than a kind of a traditional hierarchy. So a single position from Google is just very hard. But I think what's clear, given the attention that this has had on the Chrome side, we will be obviously making sure that any other products that implement this, and different products with different stages of thinking about this, it'll again be done in a careful and considered way, and making sure that we bring everyone along with us.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, so the radio mic's over there at the moment. Perhaps if we move across, does anyone in the middle have a burning question currently? One, inevitably, the furthest part of the middle, proving the rule. And then maybe if anyone on this side has a question, we'll take one question from this side as well, if there is one.
I have a potentially stupid question, but a potentially interesting question.
We'll be the judge of whether it's stupid.
We've got a number of powerful forces involved in this discussion. You've got nation states, you've got big multinational companies, you've got clever technologists that know a lot about cryptography and so on. In the final outcome, who holds the trump card out of those power blocks? Who's really going to dictate what the final outcome is going to be?
Okay, that's a great question. Is there either another question in the middle or over this side? Not at the moment. Okay, well, let's take that question. Sorry, was there one? Did I miss one?
There was one up there.
Was there one? Oh, I do apologise. One at the back there, so we take that one as well. And do stay awake, otherwise you might be surprised.
Thank you. So it wasn't my plan to ask this question, but I wasn't also expecting lawyers to be mentioned and called in so many times during this conference. I'm a lawyer by background, so I felt
Fantastic.
like authorized to. But the disclaimer is I wouldn't have more than 10% of answers to all your questions, so I'm focusing on that. As a matter of general discourse, we have spoken a lot about privacy, and there is this tension between whether going for counting on policies, pushing on privacy, or asking for a regulatory framework. We have many times called into questions the GDPR, and I guess we are at the very, very first phase of enforcement of the GDPR, so the potential of this specific framework is still unexplored to a certain extent. It's kind of good that we're still being positive for the future. But the point is, we didn't mention in the entire afternoon of discussions that there is a tension between the GDPR, who is kind of a EU-driven privacy objective, and national security issues. There is an existential tension between these two concepts that basically all the 27 member states, it's one of the big topics at the level of European policy. It's difficult to solve because it might be not possible to solve it in the same way for 27 member states. But the reality is oftentimes, the industry is squeezed in between these two layers. From the one side, you have a strong push towards privacy-friendly solutions and the idea that the EU should take the leadership in the industry, etc., etc. On the other side, you have the possibility that each of the 27 member states stops you for security reasons. So the idea is what we want to do for the European industry, or the industry in general, but specifically for the European industry, to get out from this. Because and how much you think that the public, the users, could be a leverage on how much this is all need to be set between industry and policymakers.
Brilliant question. Okay, well, let's take those, and then we'll probably have to get some closing comments, noting the time. I think the two things there are ultimately who's in the driving seat to sort of push the direction of travel in the industry, and then the age-old trade-off between my privacy and the country's security, and where to strike the right balance on that. Mallory, you look like you want to go first.
Yeah, I also wanted to just be able to respond to the applications doing DoH, or the point that you brought up, just because I do think that it is important to think about maybe operating systems doing that more, and I'm also glad that you brought up Android, because from a mobile ISP perspective, that could work well if most people are getting their cell phones from their telecom company. Then you have control over that endpoint, and you could install an operating system that does DoH. So just to point out that I think that would be good. I think more operating systems doing what the browsers have done would be aces. And then actually your question about who makes the decision, I actually would question the exact polar opposite, which is who loses out if DoH can't be deployed by default. Because I think that the way I also said it before is that people who are power users, people who are able to change those settings, are always going to use privacy-respecting technology. They're going to use PGP, and they're going to use Signal, and they're going to use all this. The people who lose are the people who don't know, the people that can't protect themselves through power usage of technology. And so I think that's the important stake. That's what's at stake, and that's the important thing to remember.
Which is probably 95% of the market, I would say, with no scientific basis to the number, but the majority, yeah, good point.
I mean, I'd say that there are a number of trade-offs, and they go beyond the ones we've just heard. So I think the idea that it's a good thing for the sort of uneducated public, 95%, to have DoH turned on by default as a premise. I think that really needs some exploration, because there's a whole load of other issues that crop up. So we haven't talked on this panel about things like where UK ISPs block access to child sexual abuse material. And for instance, if that could no longer persist in this new environment, that could be very, very damaging if 95% of the public suddenly were exposed to some of those images. It's not only damaging to the public, but also to the victims of child sexual abuse. It would be very damaging for them.
And just to interrupt, it's interesting at the IETF that debate was characterised by some as censorship. Whereas at I think IGF, it would be taken as a given that filtering out child sexual abuse material would be good. That wasn't a given at IETF, interestingly. But sorry, Adam.
No, and there are different norms across the globe. But and that's where you get the prerogative of individual countries deciding that they're going to act. So there's a tension between individual member states and the EU 27 as well.
Yes.
So lots of different tensions. In terms of who's in the driving seat, I think obviously as a standard setter that the IETF has kicked this off, but there will be consequences. Things will develop as a result, because this isn't going to solve all the problems, and there will be reactions to it. So where it ends up, we have to keep on game playing this out and to work out, what's the next step here. And I don't know the answer to that.
No, that's maybe a question for a different event, to be fair. Maybe that sort of GDPR national sovereignty thing maybe comes into play there, Vittorio, in terms of...
Yeah, well, in terms of the first question, I think that I'm afraid that the tragedy is that both the governments and the big internet platforms think they have the trump card. So, I mean, I see an arms race mounting here, or at least the risk for that, and that might be immensely damaging. And for the second question, I think we still have this unresolved tension between privacy and security, which is not strictly necessary. I mean, you could try to find out ways to make the two go together as far as possible. So I think we have to work on that. I mean, there is a tension. It's also what, I mean, Eric was calling some of these practices which are connected to security as legitimate exploits, which is an oxymoron. So it highlights that there's a tension. I think maybe we are at the point in time where we have to decide whether these are legitimate or they are exploits. And according to what we think of these, maybe find ways to make them work better or get rid of them altogether, but get to some agreement on, if possible, on whether they should exist or should not exist. If they should exist, they should work. If they should not exist, they should not exist. But then I don't know if we will ever find consensus. So.
Yeah, I think consensus will be quite tough in this, to be fair. Mike?
Yeah, on the who's in the driving seat question, I think ultimately we think it's the user. For the broadest definition of user, which could include network administrator on a managed network, right? Or some of those other use cases we looked at this morning. Because ultimately the users deserve security and privacy when they're on the internet, and DoH is a step towards helping to deliver that.
Okay, that's maybe an excellent thought to finish with, because I'm conscious that we are slightly over time. So maybe we'll leave it at that. That is actually probably the right closing comment then. We'll finish there. I know Till will have a few thoughts to share with us before we maybe continue discussion upstairs. So if I could ask you to thank our panellists, the debate continues.